He was a miner, engineer, pioneering rock climber and celebrated artist. Bill Peascod was born in this cottage, near the Solway coast of Cumbria on the 3rd of May 1920. His life story and accomplishments are quite simply awe-inspiring, so I'd like to tell you his story, with the help of some fellow presenters, interviews with people who knew and had connections with him, and also in his own words, which were recorded in Australia in 1965.
This is William Peascod. I'm an Englishman. I was born in a little village called Ellenborough, near the town of Maryport in Cumberland, some 15 to 20 miles from the English Lake District. My father, in fact, worked at the coal mines for many years, and as I'll indicate later, so did I. My father was having a very rough time in the coal mines during this period, of course, because this was the time when strikes and depressions and so on were hitting Britain, and particularly our area, in a rather large way.
The family began to move, first to nearby Maryport, and then to the mining village of Great Clifton. I spoke to local singer Lawrence Weldon about what life was like growing up in the village.
I was a boy in Clifton in the 50s, 30 years after Bill. But the village hadn't changed much back then. There was a good sense of community. We had everything we needed for daily life in the village, and you knew everyone, and everyone knew you. You didn't think too much about any hardship, because everyone was in the same boat. After all, what was hardship when you were a kid? When I was a lad, we didn't have it bad. We dug for Clifton coal, 6 shillings a day, give me more than me pay. Then dissipate back down the hole, get a cut on your skin, and the coldest gets in. It leaves a scar of blue. It's hard to get breath with dust on your chest, but what's a miner to do? Down the market cross on a Saturday night, your lanky clouds are shining bright. A pack of woodbines and back in the mine, the young lads soon get old. Frae William Street to Cardigan, Gateshead, Beaufort, Angriga, the lads from Gables and Stonycroft are digging for Clifton coal. The Wilton round, the cage it went down, digging for Clifton coal. No shaft of light, a permanent night, still there fills your soul. It's good on your skin, the coldest gets in, it leaves a scar of blue. It's hard to get breath with dust on your chest, but what's a miner to do? Down the market cross on a Saturday night, your lanky clogs are shining bright. A pack of woodbines and back in the mine, the young lads soon get old. Frae William Street, Cardigan, Gateshead, Beaufort, Angriga, the lads from Gables and Stonycroft are digging for Clifton coal.
Life in the Cumberland coalfields was basic and routine. The sight of snow on the fells brought a flutter of excitement to Bill and his friends as they walked to school along what's now the A66, but it was very rare that any of them went far from the village. Not many of the families owned cars, and Bill had to find his own ways to escape.
I was always keen on art. Now, I know this is rather tried, but nevertheless, it's a sort of statement that has to be made. The first prize ever I won, in fact, was in the infants class, the kindergarten, at the small mining village in which I lived, where I won the first prize for drawing, and that would be at the age of 5.
Bill's brother was born just after the national strike of 1926. He died aged 10 months. Then when she was 29, Bill's mother was diagnosed with TB. Bill was just 9 years old at the time. In his autobiography, Journey After Dawn, he clearly recalls the day that she died. It was a Thursday morning, about 11 o'clock, in the front parlour of his Aunt Eliza's house, where his mother's bed had been set up for some months. She told him, "Billy, I'm going a long way, and I won't be coming back." She was buried on the Saturday. Bill didn't go to her funeral. Instead, he was sent to the cinema. He remembers it cost 1 penny. After his mother died, Bill moved back to Ellenborough to live with his grandmother. He enjoyed a few years of her kindness and care, and also characterful uncles, and exploring the coast and countryside with his cousin Mike, until he was about 13. By then his father had remarried, and so Bill moved back to Clifton to live with his new family. Despite passing the grammar school exam, Bill's father said they couldn't afford for him to go. The family soon moved to Workington, and Bill had to get a job. He worked in the back shed of a fish and chip shop, peeling spuds for 5 shillings a week. The only pocket money he ever got was threepence for taking a delivery to the local post office on a Friday. Then, in 1935, the inevitable happened.
Like many other kids in my village, I fought hard against the business of going into the mines, but knowing perfectly well that in time I'd have to go into them. So at 14 I went to work in the pits. Whilst working there, I kept on drawing. I went to an art school in the north of England, the Cumberland Technical College. I went there for a year. It confused and conflicted with working in the pit, but nevertheless I stuck it out. I used to do lots of black and white drawings, silhouettes of old churches and so on. But finally, I think the sheer black depression of coal mines wore me down to the extent where it was as much as one could do to fight against or to survive in this environment. In those days, pre-war, pre-World War II, then things were very, very difficult.
When Bill was in his mid-teens, he discovered an escape from his lonely existence that was simple and satisfying. He discovered the local library. Books like Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Tarzan of the Apes fed his thirst for adventure, which grew the more that he read. Soon he was returning books every other day, sometimes on the same day when he could get away with it. But reading was just a distraction from his life in the mines.
And I realised then that somewhere along the line I'd have to do something to get rid of this sheer heavy depression of hard physical toil and this mental suppression, this spiritual suppression that was going on in this time. I didn't know where the release would come, but the release came in a strange way. And I discovered this one morning by leaving the pit, and instead of going to bed I jumped onto my push bike and I cycled the 20 miles or so into the Lake District on a beautiful spring morning. I was always a searcher, I suppose an experimenter, and I found the glory, the adventure, the discovery in my own native county. This was the English Lake District, something that I'd never realised before, something that none of my fellows in the mines had realised, that just beyond our back door was a glorious world that I had never seen, never dreamt of. I entered one of the little valleys. The mist was hanging low in the valleys. There were beautiful soft sounds of horses and carts and sheep and so on. And everything was bathed in a tender light. And here was a world that I had never visualized before, never even dreamt I existed, as far removed from coal mines as anything that I could have imagined.
Between the dawning and the dusk, there is a space to climb into. Beneath the failing lights of all the things you thought you'd never do. Across the stream and up the valley, where the deeper silence hides. To the forest where the sunlight falls and splinters through your eyes. No one ever goes there. No one ever goes there. Between the morning and the evening and the moments in between. Though the moss is overgrown, the place remembered in your dreams. And high above the lazy buzzards catch a glimpse of weary weeds. Deep in the earth you hold your breath and eat the damage of your deeds. No one ever goes there. 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 Between the dawning and the dusk, there is a space. Across the stream and up the valley where the deep goes there. No one ever goes there. In the earth you hold. No one ever goes there.
Bill often walked 30 miles in a day, with a mountain in between, quite frequently on his own and later with the Workington Rambling Club. Their chartered bus had stopped to pick him up one day as he was walking home from Ennerdale, and until then he hadn't realised that such an organisation existed. Soon he was enjoying more organised routes and discovering ridge walks. At the age of 20, Bill got the urge to start exploring rock faces, which he did solo at first, trailing a hemp rope behind him in the hope that it would catch on something if he fell. Then, with two friends from the mines, twin brothers Alan and Gordon Connor, he started exploring climbs at the far end of the Buttermere Valley.
And his strength came from his job. Each day he walked 3 miles to the cliff face and all day hacked at the cliff face, giving him phenomenal upper body strength. This skill he put into his rock climbing, and so he was able to climb things which many men would never have attempted simply because of this immense physical skill that he had.
One day in Birkness Coombe, the hanging valley below Highstyle, they were watching another group of climbers, led by a grey-haired man of obvious skill and experience. When all the party had completed the climb, the leader called down to Bill and asked him if he'd care for a rope. Bill shot up the rope and in doing so completed his first severe graded climb. It was also his introduction to the Felon Rock Climbing Club and the president G.R. Speaker, who put Bill forward for membership of the club, but only after an avuncular ticking off for climbing too fast.
He began his climbs late 1937, and his biggest climb at that time was Central Gully on Great End, which he'd read up from the Felon Rock Club journal and knew each move by heart. And so, having used this guide in his early days, he began to record his own climbs in terrific detail, and he acquired an almost encyclopedic knowledge of each and every move and became a master of writing a climb up.
In their continued correspondence, Speaker also persuaded Bill to ditch his Woolworths rubber-soled plimsolls in favour of some sturdy climbing boots studded with nails, the same footwear that the early Lakeland climbers would have worn in the 1880s. Back then, in boots, tweed and tied together with a hemp rope, the likes of Haskett Smith, Jones, Polly and Robinson pioneered rock climbing with remarkable and challenging exploits around Wasdale. With only primitive equipment, they were the extreme sports people of their day.
Escott Smith threw a rock to the summit of the needle. It was fun, so we stopped. The Green Knight, the first one to go. As people heard and follow, now they know. A rock and roll, but it won't fall. A rock and roll, but it won't fall down. A rock and roll, but it won't fall. Just true tradition to serve us one and all. Just true tradition to serve us one and all. Exact century to the day. To the summit of the needle, I climb the same way. Code of crow, still mid-flow, learning the subtle art of holding on and letting go. A rock and roll, but it won't fall. A rock and roll, but it won't fall down. A rock and roll, but it won't fall. Just true tradition to serve us one and all. Just true tradition to serve us one and all. Rocky headstones, plucky creatures, a wing and a prayer pass through by your features. Rocky headstones, plucky creatures, may they never fall so far beneath us. May they never fall so far beneath us. A rock and roll, but it won't fall. A rock and roll, but it won't fall. A rock and roll, but it won't fall. A rock and roll, but it won't fall.
With the advent of World War II, Alan and Gordon Connor enlisted in the RAF. This left Bill in need of a climbing partner, so he consulted the Felon Rock Climbing Club handbook, which contained contact details for all its members. Although there were precious few in Workington, Bill made contact with Bert Beck. From the address listed, Bill thought it was unlikely that Bert was a miner, and he was right, but the two of them went on to form a great climbing partnership.
But when I met this man who was a high school teacher, and bear in mind that an English master in a high school in the northwest of England was as far removed from a bloke shoveling coal in coal mines as it's possible to get, then this relationship of ours seemed on the surface to be a quite strange one. But we had a bond in common, a very great bond, and this was this love of mountaineering. Well, the result was that we climbed every weekend for several years, in fact until he was called into the army. I wasn't in the army. I tried to get into the army, but they wouldn't accept me because I was filling coal in the coalfields.
Bill's Lakeland pioneering activities began with a couple of rather minor sorties on Round Howe, a delightfully remote and compact little crag lying at the extreme head of the Buttermere Valley. Chimney Route, V-Diff, and Central Route, Mild Severe, were done in 1939 and 1940 respectively. Young and fearless, his next route was very different. In 1940 he tackled the big, dank and impressive Eagle Crag. Eagle towers over Birkness Coombe on the west side of the Buttermere Valley. It's a major crag, some 500 feet high, and is comparable with the best in the lakes. Far East Buttress was the route. It's graded very severe and is at the top of its grade. Until this event, Eagle had remained remote, almost unnoticed by the busy climbing world of Langdale and Wasdale. The following week, Border Buttress, hard severe, and Eagle Girdle, very severe, were put up. Then on the 23rd of June, one of Lakeland's great routes was produced. Eagle Front, very severe, 500 feet, forced its way up the main buttress. It was the best and hardest climb in Buttermere at the time, and it remains a superb climb today. Only 4 weeks later, Peascod was back again, accompanied, as on the preceding climb, by Bert Beck. They climbed the main buttress again by a very serious route named 5th Avenue. The crux pitch involves a 150-foot run out of rope. It's hard, the holds are sloping, a thoroughly frightening piece of climbing. When Bill led it, he was climbing into the unknown, with no protection and on belays that were hopelessly inadequate. this was certainly one of the most impressive Lake District leads. He was only 20 years old at the time, and many fruitful years lay ahead.
The mortality of the Lakeland climbers was brought into sharp focus on the 7th of August 1940. Several members of the Felon Rock Climbing Club were staying at Brackenclose Hut in Wasdale. Among them was a shy 17-year-old called David Horn, who attempted to set out to climb on Pillar alone. Bill and his group could see David far ahead of them on the walk-in. On approaching Pillar Rock, Bill heard a strange, flapping sound like pigeons, but he thought nothing of it. It was only when he raced to the base of the rock, keen to be the first, that he happened upon the body of David Horn, lying a short distance away from the start of one of the climbs. Despite several years working in dangerous mines, this was Bill's first experience of shocking, violent death. Many years later, Burt Beck remarked to him that the experience had slowed them all down a bit. Life had changed a lot for Bill. He was married to Margaret in 1941, and in 1943 they had a son, Alan. Bill and Margaret's marriage had encountered difficulties from the start, as Bill was never going to scale back his climbing activities. Climbing was his antidote to the mines, and where he had formed some strong friendships. Burt Beck was a steadfast second to Bill's lead climbing, and was about to encourage him in other ways too.
He persuaded me during these times of mountaineering to start an evening class to try and get myself out of this black depression of coal mines. And I began studying mining engineering at the local technical college, and at this time art went into the background. At least active art went into the background.
It should be remembered that although Bill began climbing in the late 1930s, he was able to bridge the gap between that generation and the post-war generation because he was, as a miner, in a protected occupation and therefore was able to continue climbing throughout the 5 years of the wartime. He lost a number of his friends during the war, and in some of his writings he became reflective about their loss, not only as brotherhood of climbers, but to the community in which he lived.
When I was very young, I was a member of a mine rescue team. I was 26 at the time. After 6 months of training, we had a large explosion in one of the mines, and here we had this fearsome job of getting out 15 dead bodies. Within 6 months, I was in another one. This time there were 104 men killed. It's still with me, this scar of finding 25 dead coal miners in a heap in a hole.
The bodies became gradually more frequent, collapsed as in sleep. One was sitting on the belt, arms on thighs, head on chest. All were covered with dust. We came to the end of the line of victims. The end of that line of victims was my grandfather, Jack Quirk. He was 38 years old.
toss you a candle to guide you ahead. Beggar boy, raise your head, follow the lantern till this weary night is at an end. Lead kindly light amidst the inner circling glow over moor and fell, over crag and torrent till the night is through. Lead kindly light.
These documents, these newspaper cuttings, these maps have been part of my life as long as I can remember. My dad kept everything from when his dad died, and we have a keen interest in local history, local heritage, and over the past 5 years, local art. And that resulted in me buying a copy of Bill Peascod's autobiography for you.
Yeah, and really fascinating on reading it. We knew that Bill was a miner in his younger years, and also what we learned from reading the book was that he was on the mines rescue team. And we thought, was it possible that Bill had actually been involved in finding Sal's granddad? And through going through the detail of Bill's description in his book and these detailed maps and reading the mine report from the event, we established that Bill did find the body of Sal's granddad.
We can see the route that he took into the mine. We can see the area where there was the bricked up wall and where the end of the line of bodies were that he first found.
The event happened at 5:40 on a Friday evening, and he went in as part of that recovery operation. Just before Bill was going on shift, they learned that there were 3 survivors that had come out, which gave the community, the miners, the families, hope. What it must have been like to go down as part of the mines rescue team, to see friends, colleagues, must have been very, very emotional for the mine rescue team.
One of the survivors was, again, it was a family member. It was Daniel Hind. He, according to the maps where the miners were deployed, he was working with my granddad at the time of the disaster. But it was community. If you read an excerpt from one of the newspapers about the 3 survivors, the mines rescue man was quoted as, "I was talking to Dick Glaister and George Mossop. I heard a voice say, 'Is that Bob Brannan?' I shouted back, 'Aye, mate. Is that you, John Birkett?' 'We've known each other since childhood,' Birkett exclaimed. 'Give thanks that there is a God in heaven,' and began to drag himself through the tunnel, followed by Dan Hind and Jim Wayman. We didn't know whether to laugh or cry."
And it wasn't just the local Whitehaven community. Obviously this became a national event with mines rescue teams coming from the northeast, Scotland, Lancashire. And it was also the first time they'd ever used dogs in mines rescue.
Lead kindly light. Lead kindly light.
Yeah, well, in 1946 he started developing Buckstone How, which is high above Honister Pass, and it's a very slaty, intimidating little crag. But I suppose a new feature about it was a roadside crag. You know, you could reach it in 20 minutes from the top of Honister, and that was a kind of a fairly new concept rather than the remote higher crags that, you know, the trend was to climb on Scorefell, or in Langdale it'd be a Gimmer Crag, a Pavey Arc, and Bill had climbed in Birkness Coombe on Eagle Crag. So this was kind of a new way forward, really. And the routes he did were quite stunning. First did Sinister Grooves, and then he did Groove 2. Both the grade was very severe, but the technically hard routes. And, you know, Bill was climbing with zero protection, and the rock was... well, it's not exactly slate, but it's very slaty. Right above it, the rift right above Buckstone How is one of the main quarrying areas of Honister, and that's My dad worked there in the early days, you know, probably in the 30s, and he never wanted to climb on the crag because of the nature of the rock. You know, slated, the way it splits. You've got to be extremely careful. And he continued with the development on there until he did his last route called Cleopatra. And it's a really incredible route, right at the cutting edge of what was possible. It's very, very intimidating. You start off going over an overhang on sort of slaty kind of flakes and blocks, and then you're really committed on this blank piece of rock. And you move up to a groove on the left, but again, even today, there's no real proper protection. It's just flakes of slate that, you know, if you pull on them, they're going to come off. And then you go across this blank, it looks like an absolutely blank wall, and it's like a miracle. You're kind of fumbling about, and there's actually a quartz pocket which you can get 2 fingers in. It's a superb hole, and it just makes this move possible, but it looks completely blank. And then you move into another steep area where there are holes, but it's all intimidating climbing. And think about doing that with no protection on a hemp rope. It's just absolutely mind-blowing, really. I mean, today I think it's graded RVS in the guide, but it's, you know, it's at least extreme 1. It's very hard, and I think, you know, people who've been on a climbing wall today and are probably brilliant technical climbers and fantastically fit. There's not many of them, if any of them, could do that climb now. It's a really demanding route.
From the night shift, time to quit the pit. Cycle east in a wander, on a journey after dawn. High upon the eagle at the last belay. The war, the blood, the coal dust has seemed to haul a world away. A view of peace, an evening solace, it's a charge in my brain. Release is only with the mountain in morning sun or rain. And no one holds my soul to ransom, no chain confines me, while the mountain is anarchic and free. There's a path to take me higher, to the edge above the mist. Poor man's mountains, with your charity burlesque, never was too much to wish for, stepping up through the door. Poor man's mountains, poor man's mountains forevermore.
In 1947, I joined my first summer camp at Gatesgarth Farm in Buttermere. On the evening of the first day, I climbed part of the route up Fleetwith Pike to a small white cross, a memorial to Florence Mercy, who had fallen to her death at this point. As the sun set, I looked down on Buttermere, with High Crag, High Stile, Red Pike, in deep purple shade, across to Crummock Water, flanked by Melbreck, and wondered at the beauty of it all. Every day in summer camp was an adventure as well as a physical challenge. Usually in July, the vast flocks of sheep were gathered in for clipping and dipping. This encouraged me to leave with Farmer Richardson's boys at 6:30, and with a dozen dogs we would set off up the mountain, ranging far and wide across the fells surrounding the farm and beyond. In the evening, we would gather in the farmhouse. The gathering gang would include the neighbouring farmers, and Old Mother Richardson would place before us an enormous meat and potato pie, which I now know as tatty pot. There was plenty of ale for the men and ginger beer for the boys, and a sing-song usually followed. And for me, it was early to bed in the barn, above the dipping channel, surrounded by fleece. During the third summer camp, at the end of July 1949, I met Bill Peascod, who at the time was a mine manager and part-time lecturer in Maryport. He visited Buttermere regularly and was putting up new routes with his climbing partner George Rushworth, later to be joined by Stan Durkin. The previous year they'd been concentrating on the Newlands Valley, but were now back in the Birkness Coombe, which they had first explored in 1941 together. Early in July, I was invited to join them on a visit to their old haunts, including Eagle Crag. I'd now equipped myself with pumps, simple black rubber gym shoes from Woolworths, the precursor to the rock boots of the late 1950s. I didn't possess a full-length rope, but Bill and George had 120 feet of full-strength hemp each. Between us, we had half a dozen ex-War Department carabiners, probably 4 or 5 nuts, a couple of slings, and that was it. We all wore heavy leather boots nailed with trichunes and clinkers. We began our warm-up in Birkness Gully, classified then as difficult, but no longer so. Later that day, we crossed the Grey Crags, easily managing Mitre Ordinary and Mitre Direct, finishing the day on Bishop's Arret. This was a spectacular day for me, and an indication of the skill and sensitivity of Bill by introducing me to the easier routes in which nothing was frightening and rope management less than critical. The following year, further visits to Buttermere enabled us to explore High Crag, managing Gatesgarth Chimney and Sheepbone Buttress. And once more we met up with Bill and George and attempted Birkness Chimney. I found climbing on this sloping chimney hard, struggling with the top pitch, which Bill gently pulled me up with gentle words of encouragement. And it was clear that he was an outstanding tutor. His initiative opened up a lifetime of climbing and mountaineering worldwide, for which I'm eternally grateful.
There's a path to take me higher, to the edge above the mist. Poor man's mountains, with your charity burlesque. Never was too much to wish for, stepping up through the door. Poor man's mountains, poor man's mountains, forevermore.
The end of the 1940s were a period that Bill described as the good years. He was still pioneering new routes, many of which were still awaiting a second ascent by other climbers. And in 1948, he finished this book, a guidebook of climbs around the Buttermere and Newlands area. It was published the following year by the Felon Rock Climbing Club, and it includes contributions by George Rushworth and Bert Beck, and the artwork was by William Heaton Cooper. In 1950, he had another article published in the Felon Rock Journal entitled The Cinderella of Climbing Valleys, extolling the virtues of Buttermere. Routes mainly pioneered in the 1940s had raised Buttermere to the same level as Wasdale and Langdale for first-class climbing. And in the same way that Bert Beck had persuaded him to start studying mine engineering, Bill was about to be encouraged to return to painting through his friendship with Borrowdale hotelier Sandy Badrock.
All of this, the mountaineering, the rock climbing, the association with nature, left its mark very deeply in me. The coal mines too. I left the mines after 15 years. I qualified as a mining engineer, and I became a lecturer in mining engineering at the local college in which I was trained. I met another man in the Lake District who was a painter, and he was interested in rock climbing. He'd had a very hard war, a very bitter war. He was a physical and mental wreck. But because of our association, because of his great confidence in my ability, at this time I might add that I was a professional mountaineering guide, rock climbing guide, and I used to take him up the mountains, and in return for this I would stay at his hotel, And also, he would persuade me to get started on painting again. This time I was 30 years of age. The whole thing had lain dormant. And I started painting again in watercolour, in the typical English watercolour style. And this man introduced me to Turner and Constable. And there were paintings and there were things in there that I hadn't seen before. And it was Turner's lyricism, Turner's poetry that captivated me. And it was Constable's magnificent use of paint texture that I think also had an influence that sort of got me going again on painting.
At the end of 1951, Bill applied for and was offered a new job. Preparations for this new adventure took up most of his time, but he did manage to come back to Buttermere in June 1952 to lead a meet of the Felon Rock Club. On his way home, he left by the same track that he'd first seen the area by, and he stopped to wonder if he'd ever see the valley again.
And so on September the 5th, 1952, Bill arrived in Wollongong, an Australian town nestled in the strip of land between white sandy beaches and a tall escarpment stretching 100 kilometres to the south, covered with lush, temperate rainforest. He would spend 28 years in Australia, a time that would see a new career as an artist blossom and his family and circle of friends grow to traverse the globe.
No turning back on a one-way road. Wouldn't want to go back even if I could. The days to call the shots are new, or someone will be firing the shots at you. No turning back on a one-way road. Wouldn't want to go back even if I could. The days to call the shots are new, or someone will be firing the shots at you.
Bill accepted a job in Australia teaching mining engineering, but away from Cumberland, where his reputation, skills and knowledge spoke for themselves. In his new home, he often found himself feeling that he had something to prove. Bill's close friend and confidant in Australia, Les Zatara, had a front row seat as Bill gamely threw himself headlong at these obstacles.
Well, one thing that really amazed me about Bill was that he did have some qualifications in mining, but his knowledge of subjects such as maths, physics and geology, as well as mining engineering, which is obviously he must have learned something from what education he did have. He had very little formal education. And for somebody like that to have the depth of knowledge that he carried in his head was just quite extraordinary. After he'd been working at the School of Mining Engineering in Wollongong for a year or two, I'm not sure, but I think he was probably running it. And he thought he was due for a rise in his wages. And he wrote to the department. And they replied, yes, we will look at this in a favourable light. But first of all, you have to take this exam. And he wrote back and said, well, yes, I'd be very happy to do that, but there is a problem in that I both set the papers and marked the exam.
While Bill struggled to advance his position at the school, he was struck by the sheer differences between the Australian landscape and the Lake District that he knew and loved. There, a beautiful climb was just a quick bike ride away. Here, getting to a climbable rock face meant hours of cutting his way through dense underbrush and scrub, or hours in the car, all the while watching out for snakes and picking the spiders out of his hair.
Driving west into a desert sunset, leaving Wollongong 300 miles behind. What a place so different from my homeland. And what a way to find another climb. We're on a wall that's steep and unprotected. I'm coming down, 'cause this one's not for me. We'll try a rib, this route's got potential. The time's against us now, we'll have to wait and see. Colours of the western plains seep into my memory. Pallid of the lakes now seem a distant world away. And at night out here the stars light up the darkness. Lying in the cold black night, waiting for the light of day. Early morning warrumbungles casting shadows. Now we're packing up and heading for the coast. The light is different here and I feel the memories growing. But it's the climbing people that I miss the most. Colours of the glasshouse mountains seep into my memory. Pallid of the lakes now seem a distant world away. And at night out here the stars light up the darkness. Lying in the cold black night, waiting for the light of day.
Travelling to somewhere like the Warrumbungles, for example, you really have to go there on a weekend. You can't go there for a day trip. And in fact, most people who go to the Warrumbungles go there for a long weekend. It's such a big distance to travel. In Queensland in 1954, there was a plane crash. A young child was being brought from Townsville to Brisbane and the plane crashed into a mountain just south of Brisbane. And one of Bill's proteges, a guy called Neil Lamb, happened to be out with a Brisbane bushwalking party when the plane crashed. They heard the crash. They were the first on the site. Unfortunately, everyone had been killed, but they realised that they had no search and rescue skills. If someone had been alive in that crash, they wouldn't have known what to do. And so the president of the club, the Brisbane Bushwalkers, Julie Henry, somehow got onto Bill Peascod and asked him to come to Brisbane to run a training session to teach some rudimentary safety skills to the climbers, rope techniques. And Bill ran a course at Kangaroo Point Cliffs in the middle of Brisbane one Saturday morning. About 30 or 40 people turned up to it. It was very well attended. And he showed them how to use ropes, how to use carabiners, which they'd never seen before, how to tie knots, how to make a harness up with a sling. All of these safety things which were just commonplace for him. And for the climbers in those days, it was all new. But I think the thing that Bill brought with him to that training session, and several of the people I've interviewed talk about it, was an ethos. The idea that you're not conquering anything when you're climbing, you're part of the environment. You have to work your way through it. You have to problem solve and be a part of the cliff, be a part of the mountain. Several of the people I interviewed said that that was what they took away from the meeting with Bill Peascod, that ethos that climbing was something which we should enjoy. It's part of our lives. It's not something we do to conquer anything at all. When he climbed Faith in Queensland in 1955, it was the first new route here since the war. There'd been nothing done in Queensland really up until the late 1930s. So he really was pioneering climbing in a way that local people really just hadn't thought about. Bill seemed to have that capacity to seek out a new route that people had looked at and thought, no, it's too difficult, or we can't see where it goes. He somehow managed to find a way up Tibbergargan and that route called Faith. And it really today, it's still a challenging climb. Run out, windy, route finding is challenging. It just seems to sit with everything that Bill Peascod was. At that time, the climbing community was very small. I'd say that there were probably a half a dozen climbers in each of those major capital cities who were regular. So somebody coming from outside, particularly from England, and he was a little bit older than the local climbers. They were young whippersnappers, brash young Australians who probably saw this old pommy coming in here and thinking, well, you know, what the hell's he going to tell us? He may have felt a little bit, maybe not part of that particular crowd. It was a very cliquey kind of culture, climbing. It was very much on the outer in Australia because surfing had really been the thing that attracted young people. Climbing was for people on the edge, on the outer, and if you climbed, there was something wrong with you. So I guess, you know, that meant that there were fewer people doing it in a way.
When the passing of the lakes left an enormous void in his life, and facing a possible dead end in his teaching career, Bill rediscovered his passion for art, and his life turned in a surprising new direction.
Who cares if I climb it? No one will claim it if I leave it for another day. I miss the lakes, I miss the climbers, I miss the drinks we had and talking about roots, sweet victories we plucked as easily as picking ripe fruit. I miss home, I miss the gloom. It's like I'm trying to breathe in a vacuum. The earth is burnt, the rock is cracked and crumbling. I can't pick out a line or see a method. If there's no more climbing, I'm desperately in need of something to fill the void. Get some fresh air in the system, chance to do things that I never had as a boy. A little painting in the evening, study maths and geology by day, find a route through academia, but even this country puts barriers in your way. The earth is burnt, the rock is cracked and crumbling. I can't pick out a line or see a method.
But then, after a while, the desire to paint became greater. And at one particular time, I could almost state the date. I certainly can state the month. This was in February of 1959. I felt a fierce urge. I can't put this into words. This tremendous urge, as if everything had been welling up for years in me, that I must paint. And I began painting, and I began painting and painting like mad. And I just haven't stopped.
Just as he'd done with mining, climbing and teaching before, Bill threw himself into learning the craft, not just of painting, but the craft of becoming William Peascod the painter. So entering every competition that he could find. Systematically working his way through letters pages and reviews, art journals and magazines, underlining the name of every Australian artist that he saw so he could remember who they were. Over the years, one thing led to another. His first competition entries led to his first group exhibitions, then his first painting sales, his first solo exhibitions, his first exhibition interstate, and then his first exhibition overseas. Soon enough, galleries started writing him flattering letters, asking if they could exhibit more of his paintings. Before too long, party invitations were arriving from artists just a few rungs up the ladder, like Thomas Bleghorn, and he began correspondence with some of Australia's most prominent artists, including Brett Whiteley. Bill took advantage of every foothold offered to him on the climb out of obscurity, spending every waking moment painting and daydreaming his way through a teaching job that kept a roof over his family's heads. He'd even scribble exhibition designs on the back of examination booklets.
I teach for 2.5 days a week, and I still have to do a little bit of office work, but I can, if necessary, paint every day. My time is organised so that I can paint pretty well as much as I am able to paint. I doubt if I'd paint anymore if I were a full-time painter, and then the commercial aspect of it and the necessity to live might be a dampening influence on what I'm doing, so that as things are at the moment, then conditions are good for painting.
Bill's next-door neighbour, mate and fellow artist Graham remembers just how thorough Bill could be with his relentless self-promotion.
That sounds just like Bill. I think he just wanted to earn a living. You know, he enjoyed being an artist. He enjoyed being a painter. I said earlier that I was a sculptor. I did kinetic sculptures, and I was getting accepted, but I didn't like it. You know, I didn't like being in the limelight, but Bill did. It was just part of his persona, that's all. Not cutthroat or anything, He wanted to be accepted as a good artist, but he was. You know, as far as we were concerned, he was the artist around Mount Cumbria. He was never slow. It was never just good enough. He was ambitious. Ambitious is probably as good a word as any.
Hammering on every door he could find. And if they wouldn't open, well, he'd knock again. And louder.
There seems to be some misunderstanding regarding your application for membership of the society. I heard indirectly that you felt your application had been overlooked, and I'm writing now to assure you that I've been in touch by telephone with Mr. Gleghorn, who agrees to sponsor your application.
After years of graft and determination, Bill had finally put himself where he wanted to be, earning the kind of modest living that let him dedicate hours to painting, filling the gap left in his heart by the Lake District with the kind of obsessive pursuit of painting that could keep him in the studio day and night.
The kind of painting in which man's environment is affecting man. This is the period of working in the mines where his environment is impressing its scars upon man. On the other hand, there's the type of painting in which we have the scar of man upon his environment. This is the other side of the penny, where man destroys his beautiful landscape. Here I can see the analogy of the scars of working in the mine, on the man, and then the scars of the man on his beautiful Lake District landscape.
For the hillside that's we see was not a gift for you and me, but like the oak we broke out from the soil and we struggled so hard to survive. And there is no better or worse place one day you may have to face that when our fire turns to ash, we will return to the turf to take our place back here on the fragile earth, the wounded earth, the fragile, unrequited earth, the fragile earth, the wounded earth, the fragile, unrequited earth.
Because of my love of nature, because of my association with rough things, then texture is a very dominant element in my work. What I like to do is to go into a landscape and absorb it, to let it sink in. Everything fresh around the corner is a source of wonder. The light coming in from the wrong direction on the gibber plains of the centre turns the red into a dark purple, which is most intriguing. Everything shimmers and so on. It's from these feelings, from these sights and experiences, that I soak in things that are going to come out as paintings. And when they do come, I think they come really from the subconscious. It's only when they're finished sometimes that, or partly when I'm going through them, that I again get this tingling excitement of a relationship with something that I've experienced earlier. Sometimes I'll call a painting after this, but not necessarily so. I'm painting, I think, what I felt about the particular landscape, and not just this landscape. There's one picture now in the South Australian Gallery that won the Maud Vizard Houlihan Prize in 1963. It's called Opal Diggings. The soft greys is the soft grey of an opal cliff, and from this are pouring greens and blues of opalescent rich earths. The technique involved here was to cover the board first with hessian, then to use a mixture of crushed flint and PVA glue, spread this over the board, then when it was dried, burn it with a blowtorch, burn the whole area, make it suffer. And then from this suffering landscape, I extracted these things which are rather beautiful, I think, and which are rather poetic. And it's this involvement with poetry of landscape in places in which man has scarred it that I'm concerned with at the moment.
In 1967, Bill had the chance to visit England again. But thanks to the outbreak of foot and mouth disease, he was not allowed to visit the Lake District. He did tour European galleries and take in the works of great artists, but instead of feeling inspiration, this just made him feel like an imposter. This was to be the beginning of a difficult time for Bill. After many years of strain, his marriage had begun to fall apart. And all the while, he faced the echo of the same problem he'd always had as a teacher. Even though his skills and knowledge were obvious to everyone around him, he struggled to gain formal recognition for these. And that made it hard for him to advance his career to the next level.
I don't think that he considers himself an outsider. I think it took a while for his paintings to be accepted. But then he mixed with some very famous artists and became friends.
Despite his achievements, his prizes and his many solo exhibitions, Bill was rejected for a fellowship in 1969 and told to write back when he'd become sufficiently eminent.
Bill didn't want these qualifications because he was incompetent. He wanted knowledge. And he certainly had it, you know. He had his life in order. He was never a failure at whatever he did.
Disillusioned with his work, unhappy in his marriage, and persisting, without ever complaining, on his constant upward slog in Australia's tiny, cronyistic art world of the 1960s, fate was to hand Bill a path sideways, which he followed without hesitation.
1968年にウォロンゴングで初めて会っているわけですね。で、その初めて会った時に彼の作品を僕が見て、えらい東洋的な作品やなっていうのを感じたもんだから、なんか東洋のそういうものを勉強してるのかって僕が聞いたら、いや全然そんなしたことない。だけども、こういう作品を今作っているのは自分の誇りやから、だから大事にしたいっていう、そういうふうに彼から話があって、で、それを僕が強引に日本へ持って行ったら、絶対受けるから、っていうのが、1968年よね。うん。それが初めてあったきっかけ。彼が京都へ来て、そして京都におる間、僕の家から時間を見つけては地方の方、絵を描いてる人とか書を描いてる人とか焼き物やってる人とかいうのを訪ねて行ったり盛んにやってたわけね。でまたうちへ帰ってきては今度はまた益子の方焼き物のあれを見に行ったりね。焼き物にも興味示したりして滋賀県に信楽そこへも行ったり、僕も一緒に行ったの覚えてんね、それは。その時に、僕の作品を見たりしながら、まあ、初めてだから、まあ僕の描いてんのを頼りに、まあ真似しをするような感じで、ちょこちょこ練習はしてたね。ひらがなとか、それから簡単な漢字とか、 あるいはそういう文字を使わずに、抽象的な表現。で、たまたまその時にヨーロッパとかアメリカあたりで、そのアクションペインティング、抽象の表現の方が流行った時代ね。で、まあ彼もそれを知って、字を使わずに線とか点とかによって表現するっていうことを彼はやったりしてた。
Do you think Bill's experiences in Japan had an influence on his later work?
そうやね、もう大部分が彼の作品に影響しているな。
He saw a side to art which he hadn't. I don't know whether he was aware of the sort of art that Japan produced, but his eyes opened and he loved it. It wasn't the sort of rugged, sculpted paintings that he did of rocks and mountains. It was more delicate and fragile.
During his time in Japan, Bill met a young woman named Etsu. And after courting in Japan, they moved back to Australia in May 1972, where Bill intended to finalise his divorce with Margaret and marry her. They arrived at the doorstep of their temporary house in Leafy Thirroul when at that precise moment...
It transpired that Bill had had a heart attack. And Etsu stayed with us, and we went over quite regularly to see Bill, obviously. And Etsu was 20 years old at the time. Her English was very, very poor. And I had 2 small children. Thankfully, because it was a link to communicate, because children do.
And before too long, Bill finalised his divorce with Margaret and married Etsu in 1973. And Etsu became beloved of Bill's closest friends, as did the daughter they had together, Emma.
The whole thing was completely out of the blue to us, so it was a bit of a shock. But we loved her, and still do. We had 2 small children who adored her, and it just all fitted in very well.
Between dedicating all his time to art and suffering a heart attack, Bill had let his climbing take a back seat. But sometimes the climber in Bill would re-emerge, to the amazement of his friends.
We used to climb Mount Cumbria and take a picnic up there. So Bill and Etsu thought this was lovely. And we'd take good food, nice picnic food. And Etsu used to make the nice little Japanese things. And we used to take decent champagne up, and it was a proper party. And we were up there one birthday, and when we were finished, Bill said, "I'm just going to go down the hill, down over the edge." And I got worried. I said, "Bill, that's very steep, I wouldn't do that." I said, "I think I can manage it." I had no idea he had never mentioned his climbing life. I only found out that afterwards, probably within a few months, because we were having a barbecue at my place, and we had a friend from Workington, and that's very close to where Bill came from. And she was an athlete. She had represented Britain in the young days. And then, so she, when this fellow that was there with her was Bill Peascod, she got all excited, and so they were talking climbing, and they were talking the Lakes District and the area. And that was when I knew that Bill Peascod had another life, that Bill had climbed mountains.
In the years since Bill had last climbed seriously, the world of climbing had come a long way.
He had brought with him some old-fashioned ropes, and that was about it. And he started climbing and left the rope, and he put a belay about 20 feet up. And he said, "Come on." And he had gone up there like an ant. And I said, "Righto." And my legs started trembling. And I just couldn't it took ages for me to start going because I was physically paralyzed with my leg trembling with fear. And he just kept laughing at me, but he kept urging me on. We were halfway up this rock face in the Blue Lake area. And from the top, we noticed way down below some 3 or 4 people who were also going to make the climb. And we went down and met them. And they looked at us with amazement and looked at our equipment even with greater amazement, because they said, "Where did you get that rope? From a museum?" And then they showed us the modern stuff that they were using, the modern ropes, and they were very critical because Bill had never heard of this modern stuff. And so they showed us what they were using, high-tech stuff, and Bill was absolutely amazed. And when we got back to Wollongong, he and I went off to the outdoor shop and bought up a whole pile of high-tech ropes and all the equipment that we used. And we did a bit of climbing in the on Mount Kira. He was delighted to meet these young people because they were obviously very good climbers and they were quantum leap ahead. Just blew his mind that this stuff was available and he didn't know about it. And so that was a reintroduction to think about proper climbing again. Well, he seemed to get a new zest for life because we'd been on some rocks. Elementary though they were for him, but it was climbing.
Cold wind blows, feathered seats and changes, clouds above the frozen mountain ranges. When owls came through, my dreams came true. I was never closer to you. I was never closer to you. Everybody's gone to walk the path of Wainwright, where one of the trails that graze the highlights. But we can go where nobody knows, way up where the clouds connect to fells. We found a little place just for ourselves. In the fog, search for the dry stained cross, ghostly rumors arm in arm, soon by soon, earth laid home, safe from the gales. Now, sweetheart,
in 1979, Bill, Etsu and Emma spent the winter in a cottage in Lowton to see if they could swap living in Wollongong for life in the Lake District. They were quite certain that they could, and so they started to look for a house. 5 years earlier, the first time that Etsu had driven with Bill alongside Crummerquarter and into the Buttermere Valley, she made him stop the car. She got out and looked on the crags and fells with a sense of familiarity and said to Bill, "This is what you've been painting all along."
Up along the roads, carry me north to native stones, ever returning up the hill again, where We are the blood, you are the bone. We are the blood, you are the bone. Each the way, by lane and byway rising, while the view is tantalising with the old familiar brow. By the verge, this prodigal from the city, I beg your friends, I pity, only you can save me now. So take me up along the roads, carry me north to native stones, ever returning up the hill again. We are the blood, you are the bone. We are the blood, you are the bone. Take me where the sky's the only ceiling, on the rock of fire a healing for the weary and the ill. So with me now, wherever I may wander, through far or drought or thunder, breathing, calling to me still. So take me up along the roads, carry me north to native stones, ever returning up the hill again. We are the blood, you are the bone. We are the blood, you are the bone. Raise a glass, our friendship now remembered, but I'm feeling quite dismembered, half the man you used to know. So spin the tales of days we spent together, on the rock and on the heather, for it's there I need to go. So take me up along the roads, carry me north to native stones, ever returning up the hill again. We are the blood, you are the bone. We are the blood, you are the bone.
They returned to Australia in April to wrap up their affairs. Wollongong City Council, the university, and the local TV station gave Bill a retrospective exhibition simply entitled Bill Peascod, 1950 to 1980. The 70 pieces on display included some of his early watercolours, and then the burnt paintings, Australian landscapes, and finished with 2 Japanese-inspired lakeland landscapes where, according to Wollongong Gallery director Anthony Bond, the merest line creates the whole atmosphere of a mountain emerging from the mist.
They needed to earn a living when they got back to Cumbria, and they had this huge barn that was derelict really, for which they got planning permission to run painting holidays. And of course Etsu was also an artist, that's how she and Bill had met in Japan, and so it was all set up, and so he was painting a lot of the of views. Now, a lot of artists in Cumbria paint views, we all know about that, but these were new views with a difference. But they were still paintings that were not really abstract, or they were only partly so, but they would appeal to people who knew about art. They had depth. I remember one of Bassenthwaite Lake that is absolutely, it's so minimal, it's Japanese, in influence, and it's minimal, and you can feel the depth of the lake, just as you can feel the height of the mountains when you look at his mountain paintings.
As well as throwing himself back into the local climbing scene and renovating Melbecks, Bill also returned to teaching. He joined the art department of West Cumbria College in Workington as a lecturer. One former student remembers that when Bill stood in for an absent colleague, he presented the students with an hour-long slideshow on Japan and its ceramics. Quite an eye-opener for the apprentice carpenters of West Cumbria. At the time, it was college policy for all of the students to go on a one-week outdoors course. This was usually fell walking, canoeing and rock climbing in Borrowdale. When the college found out who Bill really was, with all of his experience, they got him involved as a rock climbing tutor. And he proved really popular with the staff and the students.
In 1980, I've been climbing in the Alps with my friend Rick Graham, and we had some pretty bad weather and some epics, and we came back to the Lake District, and it was a very wet weekend, but of course We went climbing every weekend. So we went to the Bowderstone. It was actually raining. It was really slippery. There's a crack up the side of the Bowderstone, which I thought, well, I'll give it a go. I'm going to fall off because it's so slippy, but I'll be okay. What wasn't to plan was that my foot got stuck in the crack. Instead of flipping over onto my feet, I just went straight down with on my outstretched arms, and I smashed my wrist. And it was pretty bad, really. So I was off work, civil engineering, and I thought, what can I do? I was living in Kendal, so I thought I'd go down to the Kendal reference library and start this book about the history of rock climbing. And so it was unbelievable. I'd written quite a bit of the book already, and the phone went. I was just about to start the Bill Peascod chapter. I knew the name Bill Peascod. I knew his roots, but I didn't really know anything about him. Obviously, he was generations before me, and I couldn't believe it. So the phone went, and said, who's that? And I said, this is Bill Birkett. He said, oh, I used to climb alongside your father. It's gosh, it just seemed like unbelievable. He said, it's Bill Peascod. Oh, I just couldn't, I couldn't believe it. And it was Bill Peascod. He'd moved back to the Lake District and he was climbing. And anyway, we met up, and after that we became great friends, climbed together, and yeah, I finished my book, he wrote his book, and then jointly we did the women climbing book together as well.
In 1985, Bill's autobiography, Journey After Dawn, was published. And about the same time, he revisited one of his classic climbs on Eagle Crag, with Chris Bonington and a TV crew in tow. He did part of the climb in just his socks, on wet rock, which is no mean feat for a man about to turn 65 and collect his bus pass.
His style of climbing was, in many ways, an indication of his upper body strength. He was strong. His climbing tended to stutter. He got to the end of a pitch, he'd clean it up, think about the next one, and then, with due deliberation, try it.
Yeah, well, Bill became such a magnet for climbing and people who love climbing that he met up with Don Whillans, and well, we all became great friends, and obviously Don Whillans was a real hero of mine. Anyway, we all got on like a house on fire, and I was doing my book, Classic Rock Climbs in Great Britain, and said, oh, we'll do a Great Slab on Cloggy. It's, it's an obvious classic, and we'll climb it for you, and that's what was arranged, really. And so we stayed at Don's and Penmenmar, Don and Audrey, and then we went up onto Cloggy. Bill, at that time, had been having some heart problems, but he'd been diagnosed all clear, had seen a consultant, and he was supposed to be fit. And anyway, when we walked up, he was getting a few pains, nothing too bad. We set off on the route. Don was leading it. It was pretty wet conditions, and anyway, just danced across this crux traverse up to a belay, and then it was Bill's turn. He did the hardest part of the route, the traverse. He was under absolutely no pressure at all. We spoke to each other. I was getting the photographs, and then he slumped on the rope, and that was it. He was gone. He seems to die instantly, and it was just, it was terrible, obviously terrible. And Dom was very upset, as I obviously was, and that was it. Nothing we could do about it. It was the end of an era.
Closed and I was broken, and now I look back on what I lack. I crave to go back and try again, and now I know of futility, so I must say goodbye. Good night, my son.
Because I paint a bit, I learned to understand the architecture of mountains. I first came to learn of Bill's work after he'd returned to the UK, and I can see in his work that he did when he was in Australia a complete understanding of the language of mountain architecture, and some of his memoried pictures of the Scafell Range, which had got sand on the summit, are unique in the world and put him in a class of his own, and I know to this day that his work is incredibly sought after. He was a very talented man.
My husband and I moved to Cumbria in 1986, and Melbeck's farm was the first house we actually viewed. From the moment we walked through the door of the sitting room, we'd climbed our way through climbing equipment all the way across the conservatory and walked into the sitting room, and the impact of Bill's paintings. I'd no idea who Bill was at that point. I'd just been met by Etsu, a Japanese woman, assumed Bill was the same age as she was, assumed he was somewhere around the place, and the paintings just hit me. I saw very little of the house. I was just staring at these paintings. And it wasn't until we got to the milking parlour, that was Bill's studio, and it looked as though he was still in there. There were easels, there were half-finished paintings, there was a brazier. You could almost feel that the coals were still hot in it. I've got one here in the house of Heinsgarth, and you can feel yourself walking across that ridge. It's just so emblematic of Cumbria. Whereas his Australian paintings were thick and gritty and dark, but the ones he did in his last 5 years were light, and people could they would appeal to the man in the street, and he could interpret them and think where they are. Everybody always says, "Oh, where did the artist sit?" Bill didn't sit, and that doesn't even occur to people when they look at his paintings. But you had a sense of place, and that place was Cumbria.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to say that Bill would be really chuffed with this. He really obviously loved his home in the Lake District, and although he went to Australia for 30 years, when he came back, he said in his heart he was always dreaming about the Lake District and being in the fells again, and this area was ultra special to him. So I think it's wonderful that this great man really was recognised in this fashion.
Or you can keep your seven wonders with a beauty more profound. In Cumberland and Westmoreland we work the hills around, and we've lived another winter out to see the summer in, and we work to tend the rising of the green. And my labours would have meaning and be easier to bear if in this empty land was somebody. Well, I think there might be somebody. Well, I know there must be someone to love. Well, from St Sunday Cracks to Kirkston I wandered home tonight, grateful for a place to go in the dying of the lights. On the path along the fellside, a workplace and a home, as long as I've the strength in me to roam. But the bitter thoughts and turbulence come pouring in my heart, the love me and the love me nots that tore me half apart. But the beauty of the mountains mocks my heart as if to say it really wasn't worth the hassle anyway. And the wilderness of nature opens up before my eyes. In this empty land is nobody. Well, who cares about the somebody? Well, I think there might be someone to love. Well, you ask me what I'll be doing in 40 years from now, floating on my royalties or slaving in the town. Well, of course you know the answer. I'll be up to Gimmercrag with me rock boots and me tackle in me bag. And when my journey is all ended, I'll look back in peace. For if I never find the somebody, the ever elusive somebody, well, I've always had the northern hills to